We are beginning the second Perek. Okay, so Lo Yachbor. Now, like with a lot of Perokim, and generally in Gemora, one of the really important things to do, which is one of the things which is much harder to do when you learn Daf Yomi, is easier when you have a bit more time, is there are themes in a Perek. You know, there are themes that go through the whole Perek, right? And that's one of the things which I think we're going to try and pick up as we go along. So, as always, the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to present a number of particular case studies. But our task is to try and make sure we can understand what is the root of the root here. And essentially, what this Perek deals with is when I have something in my own property, entirely in my own property, that is somehow damaging you, or damaging your property, or might damage your property, or could in the future damage your property, and all sorts of permutations like that, right? That is the central topic of this Perek. It plays out in many different ways, and as we'll see. And one of the key questions that obviously is going to preoccupy the Gemara is the question of how preemptive do you have to be? In the sense that if I want to do something in my property, like dig a big trench, for example, right? And at the moment, there's nothing in your property to damage because you haven't done anything to your property, and there's, it's perfectly fine. However, you might potentially, by doing this action now, if I plant a massive tree in my garden now, think ahead, right? The roots are going to potentially, with time, they're going to go underneath. Might take a long time, but they're eventually going to go underneath the boundary, and they're going to cause damage to your land. So that's the whole range of topics that the Mishnah, that the Perek deals with. Therefore, you understand how it follows on from the first Perek, where we're dealing with Shutfin and their responsibilities to each other. Shutfin as in really neighbors, partners, what it literally means partners, but we talk about neighbors and responsibilities. We talked a lot about Hezekariah, damage you can cause by damaging other people where they're not able to use their own property in a normal way because they have to keep kind of hiding from you because you can see them the whole time, right? So all these topics, you see how this follows on from that, right? One of the central questions, which what I'm going to do, I'm going to start the Mishnah, start the Gemara, and then if we have time during the share, I'm going to present something to you from the Nesivos, hopefully, which is fundamental to understanding essentially sort of what this Perek is about and why it's here. Is the machlokas, which doesn't come up again. This is one of those Perokim where you've got to get 7 or 8 daf in till you get to the Mishnah, which really deals with one of the key machlokas, if you like, in the whole Perek, and that is a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon, which we will encounter a long way before that. The actual machlokas is on Chof Amud Beis. No, it's not Chof Amud Beis. It is. Sorry, it's actually on. Yeah, it's Chof Amud Beis, right? But the Gemara is going to bring it up many times before that. And the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon is whether it is the responsibility on the nizuk, the harchikes atzmo. That means the person who's being injured to distance themselves, or is the responsibility on the mazik, the one causing the damage, to distance himself, right? That's the question. And you tell me, well, it's obvious. If I'm causing the damage, well, obviously I'm the one who's got to distance myself. Not necessarily, because again, you have to remember that the complication here and why this makes it particularly fascinating, this Perek, is the fact that I am entirely in my own property. I'm not a normal case of a mazik. A mazik is someone who throws a ball over the boundary wall and smashes your greenhouse, right? That's a mazik. Yeah, this is not a standard this is not a standard situation of mazik. This is a damage which is happening as a result of actions which are entirely within my own land, and therefore the question arises: who has the responsibility to distance themselves? Right? Is it the person who is actually causing the damage, or is it the one who is on the receiving end? And we can turn around to them and say, actually, you should have taken precautions to distance yourself. Now, obviously, one of the reasons why this is complicated is, even according to Rabbi Yossi, there are going to be multiple situations where it is the mazik's responsibility, right? So there are going to be lots of situations and scenarios in this Perek where the Gemara is going to take the attitude, which is, okay, hold on a second. Here, Rabbi Yossi agrees. Here, Rabbi Yossi says that this is too far. This is too direct. This is too automatic, the damage that's being caused, and therefore it is the responsibility of the mazik to distance themselves. But that's kind of like a very brief introduction to the Perek. Let's get into it, and then we'll try and see how we can develop. So the Mishnah says, a person is not allowed. So Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. There's just exactly where we are. Bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. A person is not allowed to dig a pit next to. Literally, it means the pit of his friend. Okay, so that means v'lo siach v'lo ma'ara. These are different types of pits. The siach is a type of pit that is a kind of long and narrow pit, and the ma'ara is a pit that is that has a roof on. So it's almost like a sort of underground chamber. V'lo amasamai, and you're not allowed to dig a channel for water. V'lo nivreches kovsin, you're not allowed to dig a square. This is some type of basically what place they used to wash garments. We'll see Rashi. So all of these things you cannot dig in your own property, Elohim Kain, unless he distances mikosolo shel chavero shloshet tefachim, unless he distances from his friend's wall 3 tefachim, v'sod besid, and he also has to provide some extra protective measure, which is in this case the Gemora said, the Mishnah says it's a lime. You have to lime the wall, basically put lime on the walls of your trench to stop essentially presume the water, right? Water sort of getting out of that trench that you've just dug in your property and causing damage to the other guy's land, right? That's what the Mishnah says. Now the obvious question here, which the Gemara is going to talk about, is there kind of seems to be a bit of a distinction and a problem here because we started talking about a boro shel chavero, your friend's distancing from your friend's pit, and here we switched to a wall. So what's going on with that? So the Gemara will talk about that, right? Next case, you have to distance gefes, which is kind of like the leftovers of olives. After olives have been pressed in the olive press, and they have this refuse, which kind of is left over. You have to distance the gefes, ves hazevel, manure, ves hamelach, and salt, ves hasid, and lime, ves hasloim, and rocks. These are not obviously any type of rock. These are kind of flint type rocks that produce heat. So all of these things you have to also distance from your friend's wall 3 tefachim. There is a slight question here about whether it's sod besid, either or. Also put lime, or it means and the sod. The Masoret Shas changes it and sod besid, and also put lime on as well. So basically. What you have here, it would seem, is you have a difference between the two cases is in sort of the damage being done, right? The first set of cases are really water damage or potential water damage, right? Generally speaking, a bor is for water, and certainly some of them explicitly talking about water channels and that. And the second set are things which basically have to do with heat damage. They either are heat producing, or like salt, for example, the damage that salt can cause, and all this type of stuff, right? So that's really the difference in the two cases. Third case, you to distance seeds if you're planting there samachresha on a plow, the es meraglayim yuri meraglayim the menakosel shloshet tefachim. 3 from a wall, 3 tefachim. So here we have these can damage in a different way, either because of their acidity or because of the fact that the roots of the seeds presumably could damage the Gemara will explain these things, how it works. The machresh of the plow, it weakens the foundations. So all these things also has to be 3 tefachim. And then the fourth case is you have to distance the millstone 3 tefachim from the shechev, which is the lower part of the millstone. So if you imagine a millstone, an ancient millstone, you will see them in various places in Israel, and they've got them all over the place from thousands of years ago. These massive stones. We got that. That's why they stay. That's why they hang around. It's often the only thing that's left in these archaeological sites. You're looking at this, thinking, why am I seeing this everywhere? Because that's all that was left, basically. We have this massive stone, round stone. That's called the shechev, literally means to lie because it goes underneath, and then you have the rechev, which is the stone, the smaller circular stone, which is on top of it, and you kind of I think somehow sort of turn the top one, and that grinds whatever's in it between it. I imagine presumably it's between it and the bottom one. Rechev means to ride because the top one rides on the bottom one. So anyway, it has to be 3 tefachim from from the upper stone, from the lower stone, which is 4, the upper stone, and then finally, which I think is the 5th case, Vesatanor, and the oven Shloshim min hakilya shein arba min hasofa. So it has to be 3 from the kilya, which is we'll see in Rashi exactly the lower part of the oven, which ends up being 4 shein arba min hasofa, which is 4 from the upper part, the upper lip of the oven. So we'll see what that means in Rashi. So we have all these different cases. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says that all these are explained exactly what they are in Perek Shar Shenogach Es Hapara in Bava Kama. It discusses what these exactly things these things are. And in fact, Rashi gives you a bit of a hint. He says bar is agel, bar is circular, sheikh is arach v'kotzer, sheikh is kind of long and narrow. Ma'ara is makor. Makor, as you said, the ma'ara has basically got a roof on. There are other things as well. Basically, usually in the Gemora, these 3 go together. These bar, sheikh, ma'ara, these different types of trends, they're often dealt with together. The Gemara, therefore, is not so bothered about why the Mishnah lists those 3, because they kind of always go together in a group, but the Gemara is bothered why it talks about this Amas Hamayim and this Nivreches Kofsin, this pool for people to wash in. There must be some extra reason that the Mishnah is listing these cases. And Toras, because it's a little bit why it specifically talks about these cases. Maybe they're a bit deeper, that's why you need 3 tefachim. If they're shallower, then you don't. That's why, and there are obviously reasons why these are listed. Rashi carries on with rechas and kos and chofet chafira merubas. You dig a square trench, but omek ama or yoseh, the depth of an ama or more, or make a shomas kansim bar, rainwater goes in, and chavis began to wash their garments, oilem shtayim. And there are 2 of these achas shermas abegodim yom yomayim. One of them that you would soak the clothes in for a day or 2, but clothing, very pleasant. They used to use dog excrement in order to wash clothes, presumably because it was very acidic. The Kriya Machamtsan Gemora, right? Chometz is basically acid. Chometz with vinegar. That's what it's acidic properties, and that's what they used to do. They used to soak it in that. It's amazing how they managed to get the smell out of it afterwards. And then a separate pool that they used to kind of rub the garments in, the Kriya Nadion, and that's called the Nadion. So there were these 2 pools. And you have to distance these pools from your friend's property. Even it's quite clear historically in Roman times, for example, meraglaim urine was often used was commonly used as a washing, something to wash clothes. That's what they used to use. Now, what is the problem? Rashi tells us the reason why you have to distance is because the chafira smuchal bar, the trench or the digging, whatever it is, that is close to the bar, machleshes close to the bar, it weakens the walls of the bar, umarapa oson, and it weakens them, it softens the walls of the pit. One thing you need to understand, in other words, because you've got a pit in your property, seems to be the setup of the Gemara, of the Mishnah. Yeah? You've got a bar in your property, someone else has a bar in his property. If you end up digging your bar, which is closer, less than 3 tefachim to the wall, to the fence between the 2 gardens, or between the 2 chatzeros or whatever, you're going to weaken the walls of his bar. Just as a purely practical point, when we talk about the wall of a bar, okay, we don't mean necessarily or specifically that it's made of stone or anything like that, right? The wall of the bar means the section of earth that forms the wall around the bar. It's entirely possible they would have wanted to reinforce it in some way, but essentially it means the ground that forms the wall of the bar. If that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So that's the concern here. What does it mean to add lime? You lime the walls of the trench in order to make sure that it stays protected. Gefes is the psola zeisim. This is the refuse left over the olives and such was about the pressed in the olive press. These are stones that produce fire. Rashi just says all of these in the second category in the Mishnah basically produce hevel, some sort of heat. They're heat producing in some way, and therefore they can damage a wall, right? Doesn't mean just in fire. They produce some sort of warmth that can actually damage the wall. The second category in the Mishnah is not talking about a bar. It's not talking about pit. It's talking about a wall of bricks or made of cement or whatever it is, which is built on top of the ground, or that type of substance, and that is what we're talking about damage. Sroim is caution the person could damage the seeds, can damage the wall, as more explains. A plow, it will weaken and soften the foundations. All ends up collapsing. What do they do? They dissolve, the acidity will dissolve the bricks, which are made of this dry sort of a clay or whatever it is, and that's the problem. Chaim is kashin lekosel. What is wrong with the millstone? It can damage a wall because basically, as you revolve the millstone, you end up the shaking of the ground itself ends up damaging the ground. That's the bottom millstone. That's the top one. That rides on this one. It's a tefach less than the bottom one. And finally is the oven. That's a tana shloshim nakila tana kli cheresu saraf bekivshan shakaderos. A tana is basically an earthenware vessel which is fired in a kiln like other pots, or pivlamala, and its mouth is above. What they used to do was fix it in the ground. They used to make a kind of like kind of whatever it's made out of, some sort of clay or brick or stone or whatever base. That will form the base of the oven. And they put the oven on top of it. The oven, which is really just an earthenware pot. That's what the oven is, really. The concern was that you want to make sure the bottom of the base of the oven doesn't become cold because of the ground. And this building, this construction, is made as sloping. It's wide at the base, it's narrow at the top, like the measure of the tanur. So it seems to be we're discussing entirely this base, this construction. The bottom is called the kilya, the elyona korisofa. The top is called the sofa, the lip. Safosa elyona, the top lip of the kilya, or the feet of this base. Because the heat of the oven is damaging for a wall, that's why you need to make sure you distance it. Right? Okay. Fine. So that's the end of the Mishnah. Any questions on the Mishnah? Any questions? No. Okay. Fine. Yeah.
The only question is 3 or 4 tefachim is not really that much if you think about it.
Yeah,
to prevent some of this damage.
Yeah, exactly. It's 100% right. That it really isn't much at all. And I think really the key question is what is the major concern? And we said that it seems to be water damage. That is the problem. That is the problem. The question is there another concern as well due to the procedure of the digging itself and that possible weakening and damaging that takes place as well, right? And again, the reason why that's relevant is because it goes into the machalokes Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon. So Richie, let's come back to that in a minute. All right, we'll start the Gemara and then we'll see how we'll come back.
That's right, except for the rechev, which is there's no water involved there. That's vibration, which
no, for sure, that's clearly vibration,
right?
And that's clear vibration. I think the main question is really about the first case. I think
Right.
It's really about the first case. You see, the whole question here is about mitigating damage and what your responsibilities are in order to prevent that damage from happening. And one thing I like, just if you bear in mind, it's actually a good idea. It's good because you raise it this way, so it's actually useful to bear as well. The point I wanted to get to, hopefully within a Sivas, is a very basic question, right? And that is, what is this doing in Bava Basra and not Bava Kama? You're a mazik, yeah? The halachas are mazik and Bava Kama. Whether it's Odom hamazik, humans causing damage, animals causing damage, my property is causing damage. So why is this in Bava Basra and not Bava Kama? I'm not going to tell you the answer yet, but that is really central to understanding this Perek. So keep that question in mind. What is the difference? Why is it we're in Bava Basra? All this is all in Bava Basra and not Bava Kama. Okay, but we'll come back to it in a minute. Let's start the Gemara. The Gemara has to clear up first of all in a way that is really a little bit confusing. It's quite difficult. the Rishonim struggle with understanding this very little piece at the beginning of the Gemara here, because it does be a bit confusing. We'll go with Rashi and try and understand how Rashi explains this. The Gemara has to first reconcile, as so often is the case with the Gemara. The very first thing that concerns the Gemara is not the lomdus, is not the understanding, is not the. It's just read the Mishnah, right? That's the first thing the Gemara often does, right? You just told me, you just learned a Mishnah, yeah? It doesn't read well, right? Says the Gemara, Posach babar Messiah Bakosel. It starts off talking about a pit, and it ends off with a wall. I mean, just on the first case, right? It starts off saying, you got a distance, you can't dig a pit unless you're 3 tefachim away from your friend's pit, right? And then it says, unless you distance, it starts off setting up the story as a pit and a pit, unless you distance 3 tefachim mikosel chavera, from the wall of your friend. What is it, a wall? Is it a pit? What is it? So the Gemara says, like this, Rashi leaves out the brackets as the Marshal does. Amar Abai, so go straight to Amar Abai. Abai says like this, Vitim Rav Yehuda, some say Rav Yehuda says, it means Mikosel Boro Shoninu. It means 3 tefachim from the wall of his bar. That's what it means. But even though it says 3 tefachim from the wall, it means the wall of the pit. 3 tefachim away from the wall of the pit. That's what it means, right? Which is fine. So the Gemara asks though, Velesne, Elam kin hirchak mibara shel chaveru gimel tefachim. Why don't you just say distance 3 tefachim from your friend's pit? Why bring in the wall at all? Why mention the wall? You could have just said 3 tefachim from the pit, and you get to the same thing. Would you? Does it mean the same thing? From the pit or from the wall of the pit?
No, because it's really the wall of the pit has the thickness.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the basic. That's right. That's Rashi has to struggle with this because it's not the same thing. The pit is the hole, is the airspace, is the missing space. Exactly. That's right. So that's what Rashi's got a problem with here. Let's just do the next 2 lines of the Gemara. The Gemara says, no, you know why it has to say Mikosel Boro Hakamashmalon, and it comes to tell us the Kosel Bar Shloisha Tefachim. It's telling you a separate halacha. It's telling you that the wall, the thickness of the wall required for a pit is 3 tefachim. That means nafkamina. What's the practical difference? Lemeka chomemka, for sale, selling a pit. If you sell someone a pit, you got to know that what you got to sell him is a hole in the ground plus a 3 tefachim circumference of wall or land around it that belongs to the pit. That's how wide the wall is. A person says to his friend, I'm selling you a pit and its wall. The wall has to be 3 tefachim wide. And that's why it specifically says Mikosel Boro, right? To tell you that this is the minimal size, this is the thickness of the wall of a pit. It has to be 3 tefachim. So that's how the Gemara reconciles the first the Mishnah. It means 3 tefachim from the wall, and the reason why it emphasizes the wall is in order that you should know that this is how thick walls have to be in pits. If you ever go ahead and set up a pit selling company, you need to know that the minimal size of the wall is 3 tefachim wide, which is quite important. Says the let's see Rashi. Posach babar, samach babar shachavero, close to the pit of his friend. And then it finished off. You distance from the wall. You should have said this distance is from the pit. Because if it talks about the wall, that means a wall. Generally, we understand a wall to mean a wall built on top of the ground, not a wall underground, not a wall as a wall of the pit. The Gemara answer Mikosel Boshin and Koloma says the next Rashi, Hi Kosel Diktani. This Kosel, which we're talking about, Mikosel Boro Kalma, the walls of his pit, Shafu Kori Kosel, because you can have a pit. The wall of a pit is also called a wall. It's just a wall of a pit rather than a wall above ground. So the Gemara says, but let's name it Boro Shel Chaveroi, should say from the pit of his friend. Vano Yodana. Now Rashi is coming to answer the question, David, that you mentioned. Vano Yodana, I would know, says Rashi, to Mikosel Ka'omar. I would know, even if it said Miboro Shel Chavero, I would know that it must mean from the wall of the pit. Di'ime Chalol Boro Ka'omar, because if it means 3 tefachim, from the airspace of the pit, right, from the actual pit, Ein Zeh Konos L'Zorech Shelo, right? Klum, you're not actually going into your property at all, because the assumption is there is a thickness of a wall. Let's assume it's 3 tefachim, right? You're going to end up basically putting your pit right on the edge of your property. And sometimes you'd end up knocking down the wall of your friend's pit. Imhu rochav mishlosha. if it happened to be wider than 3 tvachim. If you say, in other words, there's an absurd conclusion. Rashi is telling us like this. It comes to an absurd conclusion if you would learn the Mishnah that you have to distance 3 tvachim from the actual airspace of your friend's pit. And that's because if the Mishnah is saying 3 tvachim from the airspace, either you're likely to be right on the edge of your property, or you might even, it might be saying you can go into his property, which of course you can't. Because, do you understand? If it's saying 3 tvachim from the airspace, well, 3 tvachim from the airspace could be inside his property. He might have left a 5 tefach wall. So therefore, it can't be. It must mean, when it says distance from his pit, it must mean from the walls of the pit. And if it means from the walls of the pit, and we know that's what it means, why specify the wall? Why specify the wall? Okay?
Why can't it be the pit itself? Why did, yeah.
Because if it was from the pit itself, and it's saying you've got to be 3 tvachim away from the pit, from the airspace, that might mean you're actually cutting into his wall, the wall of the pit. You might be going, if he's got a pit wall which is 5 tvachim wide, and you're allowed to be 3 tvachim from the actual pit, then you might be ending up cutting into his wall, cutting into his land, which can't be.
But why would you assume that? Why would you assume that you can encroach on the land?
I don't think you wouldn't assume that you can encroach on his land. Rashi is saying that's the Gemara's question. That's the Gemara's question. Why mention the wall? Just talk about the pit. Because you would know that it must mean the wall of the pit. Because otherwise you come to an absurd conclusion. It's not that you would ever think you can encroach on his land, right? Of course you can't, right? It's obvious you can't. But it means that you would automatically, if you were learning the Mishnah and you saw the word, oh, you have to distance 3 tvachim from your friend's pit. There's no way you're going to think that means the actual hole, because that would discount the fact the holes in the ground must have walls. Because if holes in the ground didn't have walls, they would collapse. It's obvious you've got to, you must be from the wall of the pit rather than from the pit itself. The reason why there's a bit of a circular argument, which is why this is a bit difficult to get your head around, is because we haven't yet established that they're 3 tvachim wide walls. That's why it's a bit.
That's why it uses both languages, both. It uses Torah first and then closer at the end, so you know it's both. Well,
no, the moment we're still in the question stage of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, "You're telling me, Abai give the answer when it says mikosel shel chavero, it means mikosel boro, right? The wall of his pit." The Gemara asks on that, you don't need to say mikosel boro. You can just say miboro shel chavero at the beginning and the end, and I know it means the wall, because obviously it can't mean the actual hole, because then I come to some ridiculous conclusions like not having to distance at all. I can dig my hole right on the edge of my property, or I can even maybe go into his property, which makes no sense whatsoever. Therefore, I should have just said bar at the beginning and the end. And that's why the Gemara has to say Hokamash Malon. Next Rashi, Hokamash Malon therefore it comes to tell us, but my diktani, with that which it says, Mikosol Boro, from the wall of his pit, Lo Madnu Ba, we learn through this, Shekosol Boro Shal Risho, that the wall, the first individual's pit wall, that means the other guy, the guy you're trying to distance from, okay, Mila Kol Shlosha Tfachim, filled the whole 3 tvachim, Shehuska Gamhu Lahachik Ben Ametza, that he also had to distance from the border, right? Umimai, how do you know that's the case? Midiktani, from the fact that it says Shachaviras Chalol Shel Zeh Einam Fleges Mikosol Shel Zeh Ela Shlosha Tvachim, from the fact that it says that the digging of this trench that you are digging now, okay, it doesn't need to be more than 3 tvachim away from the wall of the other guy, that he went into his property. Nimse, it comes out that the 3 tefachim, which this individual went into his land, okay, has to be that the wall of his pit filled those entire 3 tefachim. Through that we learn shir rochav koslebar, the measure of the width of the walls of a pit. It's an innocuous piece of Gemara. It seems like such an innocuous piece of Gemara, but Rashi's gone a long way around the houses to try and understand exactly what's going on here. So it's one of these pieces which is a bit disarming in that way. Look, basically what Rashi's doing is Rashi's saying that because it says that mikosel bora shel chavera, okay, mikosel bora, from the wall of his pit, we learn that the other gentleman's wall also must have been 3 tefachim, because he also had to distance 3 tefachim away as well, okay? And the fact that your digging is itself 3 tefachim means that his digging was also 3 tefachim. And if his digging was 3 tefachim, that means that when it says you are 3 tefachim away, mikosolo shel chavero, from the kosel boro, from the bar, the wall of his bar, you learn that the wall of a bar is 3 tefachim.
Very roundabout way.
It is. It is. But the problem, I think what Rashi's problem here is, essentially, I mean, there's another problem which we'll deal with in the next Rashi, but the Rashi's essential problem here was all the Mishnah tells me is that I've got to be 3 tefachim away from his wall, the wall of his pit. How do I know that the minimal and correct size of a wall is 3 tefachim, a pit wall? I don't know that. All I know is if I want to dig a pit in my property, I've got to make sure that I am 3 tefachim away. Why? Because of water damage. That's all I know. I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about if I open a pit selling business, I've got to make sure that I'm selling pits which have walls of 3 tefachim. Where do I know that from? So that's why Rashi brings in the first guy, because you are 3 tefachim away from the wall of the other gentleman, and he must have had the same rule as you. That means to say that he also had to be 3 tefachim, and his 3 tefachim is defined as a wall of a pit, which means walls of pits are 3 tefachim wide. And the question you're going to throw back is, why? The other guy dug his pit when you weren't there. Someone went first. Why'd you have to dig? Why'd you have to be 3 tefachim away when you're the first one to dig a pit? That Mishnah doesn't say that case. What does the Mishnah say? You're not allowed to dig a pit next to a pit. Someone was first. Yeah. If there's no pit, now you're going to start asking, hold on a second, but what if because you have to be precautions because he might in the future? Different question. But the Mishnah, an important question, which we'll come to, as I said, but the Mishnah's case is not a scenario where we're talking about that. The Mishnah's case is talking about where there is a clear and present potential for damage, because Ruvain already has a pit near the property boundary, and if you end up digging your pit too close, you're going to damage his pit.
So you're saying that the very first pit shouldn't be an issue?
Well, that's the question. That's right. Shouldn't be an issue. And that's where Rashi deals with the next Rashi. Rashi deals with this. The Nafkamina says Rashi lemeka for memkar. Yeah. The Nafkamina, the Gemora said the practical difference is for sale, for business. Right? That was what we said. That's
The man had lots of the person had lots of pits in his field.
Yeah.
Forget about a neighbour. You have to make sure everyone has 3 tefachim in the wall.
What if it's your own land? You could do what you like.
Well, no, because you said that every pit he's going to sell.
Oh, if he's selling them.
individual pits.
Yeah. If he's selling them, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. If you say to someone, look, there is a series of prokim in Basra, like Hamoicha, right? You've got Hamoicha Asabayas, Hamoicha Peres, and whatever, where the Gemora goes through how the rules of sale. And when you sell something, what does that mean? If I say to you, I'm selling a house, it's fascinating, Gemara. What does it mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Does it include the garden? Does it include the whatever? There's all sorts of things. It could mean anything, right? I mean, this has very major ramifications as well. In English law, Lav does the same thing, right? What does it mean? Well, you didn't specify. The answer is you refer to this document of sale. But let's say you didn't have a document of sale, right? What does it mean? What are you selling? So here we're saying like this. If you sell a pit, you mean a pit with 3 tefachim earth around it. That's what it means, because that's the wall of the pit. So Rashi says,
a quick question. So if someone's digging a well, which is for benefit, then these rules don't apply. It's only for a pit that's like basically for rubbish or stuff like that. It's not a beneficial.
No. Bar I think is a well. I think bar is a well. I've been translating it as a pit. I mean, I don't know how Rabbi Archibald translates it. A bar is a pit, but no, it's a useful functional pit. So you probably is a well.
It says a pit, yeah, his own property. There's even a definition of pit.
I mean, in pit is a pit.
Because I thought that wells have special halachas because effectively it's a communal resource.
If it was a communal well.
But
You're
even
right.
if you dig a well in your garden,
Then you can have a private
they
well.
used to have the wells basically in the center of the village because they
Yeah.
didn't want people depleting
That's
the
right.
water
That's
resource.
right. That's right. And there's all rules around that when it comes to Erevin and it comes to Ole Regalim, and they used to go through and have rights to take the water, all this type of stuff. Exactly. But not in your private. You can have a private pit in your private well. You can have a private well.
Isn't the issue also that if you've already got a pit, your digging of your pit is going to potentially undermine their pit? In other words, the whole ground could cave in, whereas
Yes.
that would not be the case if there was no pit previously.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. That's right. That's right. So that's what we'll come back to, the whole idea of whether what precautions you might need to take if the other guy doesn't have a pit. But yeah, was that? Yeah,
No, it's going to take the first pit established as a precedent.
It does. But the question is, how much precaution do I need to take if there is no, what we call there is no nizak at the moment?
Right.
There is no one there to be damaged because there is a person because he owns the land, but he hasn't done anything. What you're doing potentially is you're restricting the potential use. Exactly. So how do you, in halacha, again, as I said, that's one of the fascinating topics of this perek, right? How do you halachically classify such potential possible loss, which does not exist at the moment? He may choose to build a shed in the garden, which might be completely irrelevant to what you've done to digging your pit. He may not use the land in that way, right? But let's deal with this problem first. Let's just deal with this Rashi. The Toras says Rashi, Minolon, how do you know? This is the next Rashi, right? How do you know? How do we know Shekosel HaRishon, Hu Havishir HaChacham in Ametza? Who says that the first guy's wall of the first guy's pit, right, was that distance away from the border? He didn't have when he dug his pit, Ruvain, Shimon didn't have a pit there. There was a question we asked, right? So therefore, who says he had to distance at all? He wasn't digging near a pit. He was just digging a pit in his own land. And the Abai and Rava have a debate about this. This is actually the next Gemora. This is the next sugya of the Gemora. Machlokes Abai and Rava. And we learn that Abai holds the Omar Rishon Eino Tzorech Laharchik. Abai says, if you're there first, if you dig the pit first, you don't need to distance your pit. Yeah, you can do what you like if you're there. If there's no one else there at that moment. So Gemora says, Tritz. We answer as Rashi. The answer is Hoshamin Leila Abai Gufei. We hear Abai himself say the Oikma that he fits it in that the scenario, even according to Abai, is the Mishnah, according to Abai, is talking about when they both come to dig at the same time. That's even according to Abai. That's how Abai fits in the Mishnah. He says that the scenario of the Mishnah is where they're both digging the pits at the same time, and therefore each one needs to distance from each other 3 tefachim. And because that is the case, okay, therefore you can prove that if I have to be 3 tefachim away from the wall of the other guy's pit, how thick was his wall? 3 tefachim. Right, 3 tefachim, because I have to be that far away. So he must also have had that you're defining the wall as 3 tefachim because he had the same responsibility as me. According to Rava, the question doesn't start because Rava holds that even if I'm the first person to dig a pit, I need to distance the same amount. So according to Rava, it's fine, yeah, because the fact that you can't ask the question, well, he didn't have to distance himself. He did because of the potential the other guy might dig a pit, right? And that's the machlokes Abai and Rava. Abai and Rava it's the next Gemara, which talks about how if someone wants to put a pit right next to the border, what's the halacha? Are they allowed to put it that nearby, close to it, or not? Yeah. So right, okay. So any questions on this? Any questions? Is this clear? Yeah, is it clear? Is this what? Yeah. So we established effectively that the reason for the language of the Mishnah and the why it talks about mikosel boro is to tell me that what the size of a pit wall is. A pit wall must be 3 tefachim minimum. That's why it talks about mikosel boro. That's that we went a long way around to get there, but that was basically what the Gemara was getting at. Okay. Now, before we get onto this Nesibus, which I want to share with you, I'm going to just go through the next Gemara, which is to understand the machlokes Abai and Rava, because it will really get us into the sugya of this perek. It's my was taught as follows: someone who wants to dig a pit next to the boundary. That means there's no one else there. There's just me. and I have a next door neighbor who may one day dig a pit, but I want to dig my pit now, and you have nothing there. What's the halacha? Okay. Abai says, no problem at all. You can dig your pit right next to the boundary. You have no restrictions. Rava says you're not allowed. You're not allowed to dig it right to the edge of the property. Now the Gemara goes through two different ways of looking at this, depending on the setup of the land. It says in what? If it's a field which is made for pits. So for example, there are some types of pit, there are some type of again, you see clearly from the setup of the Gemara that these pits were worth of containing water, right? So for example, a land which is used for crops, for example, right? So you need to water the land, right? So it's a land where you're going to expect to dig pits in. It's it's the normal usage of the land. Everyone says the Gemara, you can't put your pit right next to the edge because he's clearly going to dig a pit. He hasn't got around to it yet, but that's what the land is for. The land is for growing crops. Obviously, you're going to do that. Sorry, the land's not just for growing crops. It's the land which is for growing crops, which need to be watered by hand. Okay, the machlokas applies a field which is not made for pits. You can bring your wall, your pit, right next to the property. Because why should I have any restrictions on me? This is a field that is not normally a field that people would dig pits for water in, because that's not the usage of the land. It's not the usage of the land. And therefore, there's no reason to restrict him. Rav says, no, you can't bring close to Amalei, because he can say to him, later on, Shimon will say, you decided to dig a pit. Why are you restricting my use? I might decide to dig a pit tomorrow. You did something strange and you dug a pit when it's a land which wasn't really going to be used for that purpose. So I might do the same thing. You can't restrict my future potential use. That's number one. That's the first way of looking at the machlokas. If it's a field that is not made for pits, it's not a beis hashlach, and everyone says somich, then you can definitely put it right next to the wall, because there's no reason to think the other guy's going to dig a pit. You don't have to take that into consideration. Keep pligi. The whole debate is a field which is made for digging pits. It's a field which you need to water the crops or whatever it is, and therefore you're going to dig pits. Abai says, somech, you're allowed to put it near the wall. Now this is quite astonishing. Why? Because why should I be allowed to dig a pit right on my boundary if it is completely expected that the bloke next door, today, tomorrow, next month, next year, is also going to need to dig a pit? And by putting my boundary, my pit right on the edge, I've restricted his ability to dig a pit, because he can't use that. He's going to be ruined. Says Abaye, you can. Afilu l'Rabbanon, even according to the Rabbanon. Now we're coming to this machlokas Rabbanon and Rabbi Yossi, which I told you is absolutely essential to the whole Perek. Afilu l'Rabbanon, even according to the Rabbanon. You have to distance a tree from a pit 25 amos. That's a long way. Richie mentioned 3 tefachim. 25 amos is a long way, okay? So why do the Rabbanon say that? Rabbanon say, a person needs to make sure that if they have something which might cause damage in the future, like a tree, the roots of a tree, you've got to go as far back into your property as necessary not to cause damage to the guy next door. You can't just say, oh, I'm in my land. I can dig my tree next to the wall. I don't care what happens to the roots. Yes, you have to care what happens to the roots. You can't just dig it, right? You can't do that. That's the Rabbanon. Hossam says Abaye, you know what? Even the Rabbanon who say you need to do that, they'll agree here. Why? Hossam over there, there, when he plants the tree, the bar is there. It's present. That's the case of the Rabbanon. There is a bar in the other guy's field. Here, when you dig the pit, the guy's bar doesn't exist. It doesn't matter, right? According to the Se'ikah Omri, Abaye's whole argument is, I don't care about the future. At the moment, he doesn't have a bar, so I can do what I like. There's no restriction because of potential use. That's the Abaye's, right?
So the tree you could build up against the boundary.
Well, in the case of the machlokas Rabbanon and Rabbi Yossi about the tree and the bar, which is not our case, that's exactly what Rabbi Yossi says. Yeah. We'll see that in a second. Right? That's exactly what Rabbi Yossi says. Because look at Rava, because you see, Abai says even the Rabbanon here will agree that it's fine because there's no pit in existence at the moment when you dig your pit. For Rava, Rava will say, Rava says, you can't put it next to the wall. Even according to Rabbi Yossi, the Amar who says, this one is planting in his property, and this one is digging in his property, this one is planting in his property. That's what Rabbi Yossi says about the tree. Rabbi Yossi says, you can plant your tree, okay, wherever you want. You can plant your tree in your field, not a problem, even though you're putting it right next to the fence, and you know that with time, the roots are going to go underneath and are going to cause massive structural damage to the guy's pit next door. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi says, it's not the mazik's responsibility, it's the nizik. You're being damaged, you deal with it. That's what Rabbi Yossi says, okay? He says Rava, hold it, not so fast. Here, even Rabbi Yossi will agree it's a problem. Why? This is only over there. When he plants the tree, a central principle of Rabbi Yossi's argument, why it's the nizik's responsibility to distance and not the mazik, is because when the mazik plants the tree, the roots are not there. They are not there at that moment to damage the pit. It is a damaging possibility, even if it's almost 100% certain, which is going to happen with time. It will develop over time. Over here, you can say to him, every blow that you cause, every time you dig your spade into the ground to dig your pit, you are weakening my land now. The fact that I don't have a bar there is irrelevant. You've already caused the structural damage. Now, it's not like roots of a tree, which will grow with time. Make sense?
Except that you've caused another damage. You've caused the financial damage.
Financial damage?
By planting the tree up against the boundary wall, damage the value of your neighbour's.
Okay, fine. But again, we've got to make this distinction. According to Rava, the distinction. And by the way, we're gonna go over this piece in Mitzvah Hashem next time, because this little piece here is going to be central to the ensuing Gemora. But I really just wanted to get through because it's really just gets us into the Perek properly. Yeah, the central question of the central point that Rava's making is, don't confuse planting a tree on the edge of your property where there is a future potential of roots damaging, and digging a pit now in your property, right? Which at the moment you dig that spade in, you weaken the land at the present moment. Also, you see the distinction, but we're literally just scratching the surface here. Sorry for the pun, because we haven't got. Let's just see Rashi on this. Okay, Rashi. There's only a few Rashis here. Someone wants to put his pit next to the fence, and the other guy doesn't have a pit. So we said, according to the first way of learning the first Ikad Amri, we're talking about for example, a field which you grow crops in and it needs watering manually. It doesn't have rain, as opposed to some field which is watered by rain. The second Ikad Amri, so the first Ikad Amri said the whole machlokas is only when. You see, the first Ikad Amri is much less controversial, if you think about it. What's the first Ikad Amri? The first Ikad Amri is the whole machlokas is only where the field is not usually used for pits, right? You don't usually dig pits this type of thing. So then the machlokas of Bain Rava is basically, do you have to think that maybe he's going to do an unusual use of the land, right? And Abai says no, and Rava says yeah, because the fact that you've got a dug or pit means he could turn and say, well, I decided to do that too. So the first Ikad Amri, you have to realize the setup of the Gemora here. It's why the Gemora perhaps gets much more exercised with the second version than the first. The first one is much less controversial. The second one is much more controversial. The second one frames the machlokas in a scenario where it is the norm to dig pits. It's completely expected that I'm going to dig a bar in my property. So why should you not have to preempt that? Says Rashi, a person needs to go into his own property so that he doesn't damage his friend. That's the Rabbanon's opinion. That's alamazik l'chachizasme. Rabban say you can't say I'm digging in my property and I'm planting in my property the tree. You can't say that. It's like digging a hole in the boat. Let's do lishroshim. It says that the argument according to Rav is he can say that the roots aren't here. That's why Rabbi Yossi says there you can plant the tree wherever you want. Eventually, with time, they will grow 25 amas via zikues kosle bar, and they will damage the walls of the bar. But over here, marpisli shehim maredes v'noda machmas amaka basically shakes the ground every time you hit the ground, and that's why even here Rabbi Yossi will agree. So what we see from here is that the machlokus between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi on whether the nizik has to distance himself or the mazik is not clear cut at all. Even though Rabbi Yossi says ala nizik laharchik esatmoi, that it's actually the mazik, he's in his own property, he can do what he likes, and it's the person who's being damaged who has to distance themselves. It's not so simple. In a situation where there's direct and present damage caused now by my actions at this moment, such as digging, where the digging, bringing in the mechanical digger is itself going to weaken the land now, then Rabbi Yossi says, hold on a second. Yeah, that's no good. And this is called, in the technical term for this opinion, qualification of Rabbi Yossi's shitta, is moide Rabbi Yossi begeire delay. Tomorrow's going to talk about that later on. Rabbi Yossi agrees with arrows that are directly coming from you to him. If you're directly shooting an arrow, which is what you're doing by digging into the ground, then Rabbi Yossi agrees you can't do that. That's going too far. Okay, so that's what the Gemora says. Tosfos, yeah. Let me try and tell you two things briefly, and we can always recap next time. If you go back to the first Tosfos now, right? I mean, because the ensuing Gemara is obviously going to analyze this machlokas, bring proofs from various places or whatever. But look at the first Tosfos. Lo yachbar, says Tosfos. Kol hani ayri de ispuhu maya. All of the first cases are where there's water. The Tama mishum masunta. And the reason is because of water damage. Kedami, and the Gemara doesn't talk about that. The Tamar, what are you talking about, water damage? The next Gemara we just learned is going to say that what's the problem? Not water. The problem is the spades, the shaking of the land. When you dig the pit, that's the problem. Right? You understand? That's what is it? Is it water damage or is it damage of subsidence? What is the problem? He says it just means that from that moment in time, the damage begins to happen as soon as you put the spade in the ground. Since the beginning of the damage is his own arrows, he's actually shooting those arrows at that moment. Moeder Rabbi Yossi agrees. However, if not for the water, you wouldn't need the 3 tefachim distance. So what Tosfos is saying, a very important Tosfos, that although the Gemara kind of sort of latches onto damage that's caused by the vibration of the ground, that's only in order to make you liable, even according to Rabbi Yossi, because there's this direct and present damage which starts from the moment you hit the ground with your spade. But the real damage, the subsequent damage, which is the real reason for the 3 tefachim, is the water damage from the water you're going to put in the bar afterwards. That's what Tosfos says. Now the Nesivos HaMishpat says like this, okay? The Nesivos says like this, he says, what is the reason why we are in Bava Basra and not in Bava Kama? He says the 4 avos nezikin, eino chayav alein rak kashe'efshar lahachzik b'reshusay u'bishmira shelo yaziku. Yeah, you're only chayav when it's possible to keep them in your property, protect them, look after them, and stop them damaging. Then the Torah says to you, make sure you guard them. You got an ox, don't let it out. Right? If it's a dangerous ox, you got to guard it, you got to protect it more. That's your job. That's what you got to do. If you don't do so, you got to pay. These cases, and not just this Mishnah, all the way through, we'll see, when you're obligated to pay the damage, you wouldn't be able to use this, you would be restricted in the usage of your property at all. You won't be able to use it at all. And you will actually be completely prevented from making use of your property in this way. Since it's impossible to do it and guard it. It's fundamentally different than the cases in Bava Kama. Cases in Bava Kama where there is a possible solution to the damage being caused by protecting it, right? I can stop myself having an animal which damages your animal. I keep it on a rope. I keep it on a leash. I build a high fence. In this case, right? Bittul reshus lo chayv rachmana. The Torah doesn't obligate you to not use your property in a normal way, right? You're allowed to use your property in ways that you wish, as long as you take precautions. As long as you take precautions not to damage someone else. Okay, so there's a fundamental difference, says the Nesivos, between what we're discussing in this Perek and what we're discussing in Bava Kama. All of the cases that we're going to discuss here are all scenarios where simply saying that if you cause damage, you have to pay, means you won't be able to use your property at all in this manner. You won't be able, if we restrict it, we'll say, well, you can't dig the pit. You can't dig the pit at all. That's not that. That is not that goes beyond anything the Torah would ever require you to do, because the Torah doesn't require you to not use your property in a normal way. Instead, that is why, and we'll look at this hopefully in a bit more detail next time, and you'll see hopefully this will be relevant to other cases as well. Instead, what we're discussing here are scenarios which involve you are allowed to use your property however you want, but you must take precautions in the way you use that property, your property, to make sure it doesn't cause too much damage to others in various cases, depending on, right? That's just kind of an introduction to it. Hopefully we will come back to it. Any questions on that?
Okay, so can you just repeat why this whole episode is in?
Because there's a difference between Bava Kama deals with cases of a person causing damage or owning, or where you own property which causes damage, which escapes or whatever, or could escape, and the Torah says to you, guard it, protect it, right? That's what the Bava Kama deals with. Here it deals with cases where if we put the same restrictions on you, we said guard it, that would mean you can't do it at all. You can't guard. You can't guard your pit, right? You can't. It would mean completely losing the right to use your property in a certain way. Right? You can't guard it. You can't protect it. Therefore, we don't talk about that. We talk about cases where you've got to move. You've got to, let's say, be a certain distance away or whatever. Right? As I said, we'll go through it in more detail. He gives various examples how this works. So Mitzvah Hashem will do it next time. Unfortunately, there's no show next week because I'm in Berlin. I was working out whether I could do it remotely from there, but I think it simply will not. I don't know where I'll be. It might be in the airport, possibly coming back that night. I'm leading a group, and I can't guarantee that I can do it from there. So, will you please accept my apologies for next week, and we will resume the following Monday. Is everyone all right with that?
You honor that you're taking a group.
Yes, the return to Jewish Heritage Tours. What is this? No, invited to come. You can come to Berlin if you want, but I mean, it's to do with March to the Living. Yeah, well, that's what it is. Yeah. I'm just there Friday morning to Monday night. It just happens to be, unfortunately. So, Mitzvah Hashem, the following week we will resume and go. And don't worry, we'll go over that machlokas again, Rabbi Yossi, the Rabban, on this whole piece, and we'll take it from there. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good evening.